But without an understanding of the screens and the virtual reality capabilities, however, we are left with only alien-created illusions to assess and act upon. And I think that keeps us from any real, useful responses to the situations occurring in our lives and so many other people's lives today. Only a fool would ignore the transitional state of events and ideas and beliefs in the time in which we're living right now, and I don't think any of us here are fools. All of these things that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk this morning are polarizing our society at an alarming rate, and we have no idea right now really of the direction things are going to go in the future. And that's in the general society. Within ufology, theories abound and arguments rage over especially the abduction controversy. And you know, sometimes it's reached such extremes that I feel very confident this morning in predicting that we won't have the answer anytime soon if this keeps up. We should be admonished to get past the differences and start working on the similarities and the shared interests that we all have in this field. But we do have some answers, at least. Some start toward answers anyway. For instance, we know abductions are real. We know that the abducting agenda includes very physically oriented goals. We know that the abductors contradict themselves and often give false information, as well as information we don't have any way of testing. We know they are capable of masterful illusions. We know that they always take control of us during encounters, which to me is a sign that they fear an unfettered Homo sapien. And we know that our government knows about this situation and is actively involved to the level of carrying out covert and illegal actions against its own citizenry. No matter what the truth ultimately proves to be, we have to go for it. I mean, without it, we're like children playing with shadows. And we're ignorant, and we're certainly unempowered to deal with and confront whatever the real entities are behind this masquerade. To take it all at face value is foolish. To take none of it at face value is ridiculous. Investigations into this field there cannot be anything more important for us to be doing right now than to dig past our wishes, dig past our fears, and dig for objective reality and understanding. Well, that's the sermon for this morning, folks. What I'd like to do with the rest of my time is to show you and make brief commentary on some of the illustrations and photographs from the women in Taken, and I'll ask the gang over there in the corner to start the video. And before you do, Craig, just a moment. Most of the video is of slides, of photos and drawings. At the very end of this, however, is an excerpt from a videotape one of the women in Taken made when she was having extreme military aircraft activity over her rural cattle ranch in Tennessee. And I might point out that mysterious deaths and cattle mutilations on that area during this time corresponded to those in Alabama that Linda has made us all familiar with, and none of which were explained. Even when there were no mutilations, the dead cattle were simply, all they could find was unknown toxicology, and it led in a year's time to a loss of $11,000 worth of cattle. So this is something pretty big for the family involved here. So there will be a little bit of video at the end of this. So Craig, let's go for it. This is the farmhouse in Indiana in 1954, Pat and her siblings and her mom. This is where the aliens abducted the family, and then the next morning the military came and sequestered them. This is the only drawing that Pat has made of later experiences. She called that little device the soul machine, and she sat on it and ran her hands over those little holes of different colored light, and she heard a sound they told her was the sound of her soul. I'd love to hear about other reports similar to this if any of you know of them. This was also in the facility where she was shown the cloned body. This is Polly's drawing of some of the bulbous, wrinkled-headed aliens. She said they almost posed for her to get this conscious memory. You know how often they don't give you very much to take back consciously. And this kind of alien description has turned up in other people's reports. We'll see one more in here, in fact, in a little bit. From Lisa, here's one of her. She says, "I'm no artist. Don't tell me I am, because I know I'm not." And I think she did great for being no artist to show the hooded figures. These are less frequently reported, but this one she was able actually to see some facial features, where very often the hood completely obscures them. This is Lisa's drawing of another of the bulbous-headed entities, sort of similar to what we saw with Polly's drawing earlier. And these have been reported in a number of other cases as well. Not your typical gray or reptoid or insectoid, but something seeming to have more of a porpoise-type bulbous forehead. A typical gray in a hat, right? And this happens. I remember seeing one myself when I was quite young. She said this was surprising because its mouth would open, and we have a few cases where the little slit has actually opened. So just one of Lisa's representations. This one, she says, is very similar to a figure in Linda Howe's latest book with the flat, ridged nose area. This entity, she's not real fond of at all, was involved in what she said was one of the rape scenarios she was put through. Let's see what's coming up next. Lisa's drawing of the reptilian entity that was very aggressive sexually with her as well. And again, she says, please remember, she's no artist, but it was a brown, scaly, hard exterior with the slit eyes, vertically slit eyes, and clawed appendages or fingers. And a very robust entity. Symbols that she has seen in these, and this is so typical. I mean, we could flash symbols, and so many of them are some version of the triangle and the circle. We'll see another variety of this kind of symbol a little bit later with Angie's drawings. From Anita in Texas, this is a drawing of what she called the tan ones, and she makes a very big distinction between the tans and the grays. She said the grays could care less about us. They're very official or impersonal, but the tans seem to go to a great deal of trouble to make her want to love them and to elicit love from her. She remembered at one point patting it on the face and saying, too bad it's not real. This is the drawing from Anita's granddaughter who lives with her of what she said were the mushroom men who had come into her room one night. These, however, she said were no more than maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall. You note the drawing details that she is included in 4 fingers and so on. Here's Beth's drawing in Puerto Rico of one of the doctors on board who dealt with her and her entire family in 1978 when they had a massive abduction. Jorge Martinez investigated a lot of this case, but it's only been reported in Spanish so far, so, except for what we haven't taken. Widow peak hairline, very typical reported humanoids. When Beth recalled being taken by the military to a desert area where there was an above-ground compound area, much like what Ted described, being then taken again underground through this adobe or old type structure into a room with military, where she said 2 men in astronaut suits made a presentation here in this underground room to her and a number of other military people who had her there. And she was there not by invitation but by duress. So very similar to what Ted had remembered from the mid-'80s event in Albuquerque. We don't know where these facilities might be, but Kirtland's not that far away. One of Jane, also one of the women in Taken from Texas, one of the photographs of a UFO, Jane's entire scenario began with a number of overflights of UFOs witnessed by neighbors and relatives, and she was instructed on this day to clean her camera, get new film, and go out. They were going to be there. And this is one of the shots. Some of the body marks that we've talked about so many times, the triangle of punctures on Jane's arm, are typical of what most of us have had recurrently. Let's see if we can go on to some other physical marks, I believe, here. We'll see a little bit later. If not right now, I can't remember the order of these things. Yeah, this scoop mark on Jane's leg. Now there are some scoop mark reports that we've had, including one in the family, where after the scoop begins to heal, a waxy grayish substance oozes out of this for a while, and then it heals up to the regular scoop mark that we know, and this is one instance of that happening with Jane. Jane's drawing of a memory of being before this council of long-haired, light entities. She cannot recall what they were telling her, however, but this was the best she could do to capture the feel of these faceless entities. And again, this is often a similar situation reported by other people, including one other in the book taken, Amy. An unusual scenario, Jane recalled only snatches of an encounter in which she saw robed aliens at work in one of the facilities, and she heard them listing certain places in the Texas, Louisiana area by name, certain towns and locations, and then the words activate, activate, activate. The little black box, the memory of the faces, seeing her feet as she's being carried out of here, all just very partial glimpses from an event with in Jane's recollections. And the little black box is very similar to the box used in Ted's cloning soul transfer event. And you notice these weird black tubes coming out. We're going to see that later in other drawings. Jane's most intense recent encounter she tried to relay in a series of paintings, being on the desert planet, so many people report, seeing the UFO coming in, being under control where she couldn't move, and then watching a series of changes where the UFO seemed to beam down this illuminated globe type structure with markings she couldn't really capture in all their detail. And then this going through another stage of transformation from this globe-like decorated object to a floating dark globe with antenna that began to come very close to her, so close that she became fearful she was going to be knocked off the mesa where she was sitting. And the last conscious memory she had of this event was of this globe coming up right to her face. Under regression, we found out some more information about what went on, including an implanting procedure that this globe was involved with in Jane's suppressed memories. This is Angie, the woman in Tennessee, one of the rectangular scorched areas or dead areas on her property from an event. This now for a year and a half, of course, nothing grew there. This was an event she had recalled seeing the night before, or briefly before, I can't recall if it was just exactly the night before, in which there was this rectangular device with two aliens out in the yard near the barn area, apparently taking soil samples, which of course, you know, they've been doing since time immemorial. They just can't get enough of our soil. But the mark on the ground was physically there for quite a while. And if anybody's willing to pay for some soil sample testings, we've got some. Here's the area of the rural cattle ranch where the mutilations and unexplained deaths have occurred. And you're going to see video from this area of overflights. I just wanted you to see how remote this was from any, you know, highly populated area. One of the unexplained deaths, this was not a mutilation, it was the report from the vet was unknown toxicology, and there were a number of other cases both in the Tennessee and Alabama area during this time. But there were also mutilations among the cattle on Angie's property. There's one that seems to be almost an interrupted mutilation. I'd love to get Linda's analysis of this. You see a triangular patch of skin has been cut but not taken off yet. The jawbone has been cleaned. It's like something either was human activity mimicking alien mutilations or an interrupted mutilation of some sort on a calf there. Angie's fetus, after an alien implant that she later miscarried, she actually retrieved the fetus, but under control, of course, took care of making sure it did not, well, it was retrieved by aliens, she believes, the day later. But she saw the size of it and the features of it. She said when they came back to induce the miscarriage that this was the instrument, the long instrument that was used to induce the miscarriage vaginally, and then this little container was, she said she had no idea what the little container was for, but she did remember that also being present on the bed in her bedroom when they came to cause this loss of the child. Some of the marks from some of Angie's experiences, again, the sets of punctures, correlated with consciously remembered events. One of the fetal nursery representations, this is what Angie saw, and this one is included in the book, so you can read more carefully what description she has for the various things. Very similar to what else we've heard about. Angie is an illustrator artist, so she has done a lot better with some of her recollection drawings than many others. But again, in the corner, you see the little black box with those hoses running out of it, just like Jane had seen in Texas. In fact, Angie has a number of excellent illustrations, but we could do that all day. Here's one of them, one of the suited grays, which she said rarely would she see them in clothes. This one had an outfit on. And she didn't know what the little jumble of shapes on the table was. She said, maybe it was art. I don't know. Nothing was explained to me. She also had encounters with, actually 7 different alien physical types. This one with the bumpy skin, the bumpy joints of the fingers, etc. And some of the aliens with which she had contact were completely human-looking, although they didn't act human, they did look human, notably brown-haired and blonde-haired humans. Here's one of the brown-haired woman and man, and he's got some equipment. We can't really see it very clearly here, as if he's scanning, I don't know, the air or something, taking readings of some sort, and the woman escorted Angie into back to the craft for her encounter later on. This was just out on her property. This one, both Angie and her husband recalled the little troll-like or dwarf-like entities coming into the room, and in fact it was her husband who was taken away in this encounter. And they both remembered all of this consciously. And these troll or dwarf-like entities turn up, as you'll see in the correlated chart of comparisons there in the book, with more than just Angie in the book, and with a lot of other people too. Again, we see one of the emblems. We've got the triangles. I think they show up almost every time unless we have the serpent showing up. She said this was on a belt that one of the entities was wearing. Our timing is a little strange here. Okay, one of the craft that Angie recalls seeing out over the property, and I have not seen a report exactly like this one before, but wanted to include some of the anomalous drawings rather than just the typical things that we often get reports about. Another one over the area, and that's the bottom view of it. It seemed like a fiery or molten-y area, very similar to what's reported in the bottom of the Gulf Breeze crown-type craft. And that craft here, you can see for comparison of size, Angie below and the craft above when she was being beamed into it. Again, out in this area that's very near the northern Alabama border, where so much activity has gone on in the past, 3 or 4 years. This is a ground plan of one of the rural military facilities to which Angie was taken. A series of buildings, of areas where craft were parked, of a perimeter fence. This was, and of a rural dirt road. She was taken into one of these buildings and interrogated. And there were a number of other humans there, she said, apparently also abductees besides military personnel. Close-up of the view of the building into which she was being taken, and one of the people who was escorting her. And she was taken along with 3 other women on one occasion into this facility. We know of another facility into which she's been taken under conscious control. It's not the same as this one. This strange little craft, from one point of view, looks like a winged aircraft from the military. You've got a little flag on it. The other side, not there. And that back compartment is where she and the 3 other women were placed when they were picked up and taken to a facility. In one of the underground places that Angie recalls seeing was what she called the upturned helicopter, or the rotorless helicopter. And again, we have gotten reports from around the country over the, through the past of similar copter-type devices that apparently are not copters. two pictures. Angie was taking pictures of overflight trails, and here it just does not show up. So, but if we could look at these up close, these are taken identical, moments apart, snap, snap. And in one is a very small object that under enlargement appears to be a spacecraft. It's not there in the other one. So we need more analysis on that. Now on to Amy in Texas. This is a drawing of her conscious recollection of her first UFO sighting in Denton, Texas in the early 1980s. And there was a missing time episode and a very confusing screen memory overlaying what she consciously recalled from this. Amy recalls being taught many things by the entities that have worked with her, including, as here with her two young daughters, being shown how to pass through solid objects. And since she had mastered it, now they were going on to the daughters. Of course, she can't do it when she's not with the aliens. One of her daughter's drawings of a ball of light that she has seen a couple of times in the house, and this is a young child's drawing. She says she's only seen this one a couple of times. It's 2 to 3 feet wide, but the one she has seen more frequently is much smaller, like a probe device that we've heard reported numerous times. This one being slightly different, as you'll see here. She said it's like a wiggly tail appendage coming off of this one, but she says this is frequently in the room with her. And she doesn't seem to be fearful of anything to do with these probes, these light sources, although she's not real happy when the aliens have interacted with her. This is a recent just doodle that the daughter had made at 8.5 years old that the mother managed to get me a copy of, and you can see a lot of the what she's doodling out here obviously has some significance to the abduction experiences she's had. Amy's memory of consciously waking up as she's floating down her hallway into the kitchen and out the back door in one of her events. She said that was the conscious part. After she got outside, she didn't remember anything, but you can imagine waking up floating and being a little bit surprised. She quite was. This is the FEMA Underground Center of Government facility across the street from which Amy lived at the time she was abducted and taken to an underground facility with human and alien entities. This is also the same facility that was less than 2 miles from the house my husband and I lived in when he was abducted by military and taken to an underground facility. Just thought you might want to drop in and tour the place. Her screen memory began with this abduction where the alien apologized and removed the implants, with seeing what she thought was a big moon with the entities floating above them. Now, a lot of this is from conscious recollection, and some of the drawings are also from what she gleaned through hypnosis. She recalled being in her dining room where these the non-Earth representatives, as she called them, and the human representatives first came to get her to take her to this facility. And the men all look quite human. She said, in fact, she almost thought she recognized one of them as a political figure, but she wasn't really certain. She was told they were ex-professional pilots, military people, and so on, but when she got up close to one, she could see the vertical slit eyes and began looking at the other men and said she was aware that they had contact lens coverings over their pupils. And without the coverings, with the coverings, they just looked, she said you couldn't tell them from your neighbors. She was told to not remember this scene, and she fought very hard to do so. The facility room into which she was taken, now the little drawing at the front of that is Amy with the female alien who was apologizing and removing the implants. She said the entity had a plastic-like mask over its face, and it's very confusing what the purpose of that might have been, because if it was to keep the eyes from having any kind of control, certainly it didn't work, because the eyes were the only thing that actually did show on her face. And we'll see that a little closer up in just a moment. I think. Yeah. Amy's drawing of the removal of the implant from the ear, which seemed to be of a malleable, flesh-colored substance, and when it was pulled out of the ear and shown to her, it disintegrated. And we have another report, Barbara Barthlick has another case report where an identical ear implant did exactly this when removed. It just broke into pieces and dissolved, disappeared. But she said when she looked at it before it changed, she could see what were embedded in it, like finely placed little wires or filaments that were in this biological looking or flexible looking material that was very flesh colored. Then the removal of the implant from the base of her neck, and there is still a little white circle from where that occurred. At this point, there was nothing on that we had evidence of from the ear removal. This implant was more typical of some others we've seen on drawings and x-rays, metallic filament rod with little filaments on the end. She shows here, as we talked about earlier, where the implants are, the old implants were being placed, and the new ones, she's told, are going into the spine, the brainstem area. And the alien told her about some of the newer implants. Now this is the drawings of first the instrument used to remove them, the little biologically flexible looking ear implant, the spot on the back of her neck, and the implant that was taken out of that spot, the rod with little filaments on the end. And this is also in the book, one of the illustrations we were able to include. She said that she was told newer implants are being placed through an area behind and slightly below the ear and into the base stem of the brain area and the medulla oblongata. She said they look like little tiny metallic Tic Tacs, and that the alien told her these were the new ones. She remembered getting the close-up, eyes-to-eyes things and having information imparted to her about the nature of the implants. Consciously, she did not remember much about it, but she did remember she was very unhappy about what she was told. And under regression, she retrieved more specifics of these controls, which do match up with the reticular formation area. A more recent daytime sighting right over the Dallas-Fort Worth airport at noon when she was out on lunch break, she said was so amazing because she saw what first looked like 4 UFOs flying in a formation. As they got closer, they looked like airplanes, again in formation, and then as they kept flying, the airplanes lined up and became a solid circular object. One of the nonsense marks, and we certainly get a lot of these, this one happens to be on Amy, marks on the body that are not punctures, not claw marks, not burns, not cuts, they're just designs. And these turn up from time to time, and this one we just were able to get a good photo of. And finally, Amy's drawing of some of the helicopter harassment that has plagued her and her family ever since she made contact with me and began working on exploring her case. And of course, many of us, including our family, have had this over and over and over. Amy's had a lot with the helicopters. Angie's had a lot with numerous military flights. So give a listen.
The second time it circled. It's February 22nd, 1:35 p.m. p.m., February 22nd.
10 minutes later, it's back circling. On the original, you can see some strange antenna display on these that don't show up as we've made the generation down copies.
Second, 2 p.m.
15 minutes later, it's back.
(2:15 p.m., February 22nd.
15 minutes later, it's back. Notice this tight
What could have uprooted a tree that big is beyond me. It's February 23rd.
This is the day after the repeated overflights. There had been rain, but no storm that night. If you notice, trees very close to this one are totally unscathed, except for two that have sheared off top branches and no other damage to smaller limbs around them. Perhaps it's just coincidental, but it was the day following all of this activity, so she wanted to include it in case there was a relevance. You can see there was living wood. It was not a dead tree, albeit this would make you think so. We have samples from the tree, and it was still alive at the time this occurred. See, the tree that close to where it was uprooted is totally untouched. But there was a cut-off branch on this top of this tree, and you see no damage to the smaller limbs around it, and the same with the second tree. Right there.
3:15. February 26th.
It's 3 days later, she begins to have other activity, and this goes on intensely for about a 2-week period. It's just a little of what she captured.
(3:25), February 26th. Third time it's circled. (6 p.m. March 5. (6:50 p.m. March 5. March 6, 3 p.m.
That's one of those crane helicopters with the crooked tail. Okay, Craig, that's all. Thanks. All right, these are just some of the things I wanted to share with you. I wish I could have included and taken when we were able to publish it last year, and I hope this will help give you a little bit more idea for those of you who read the book, what the women were talking about and trying to describe. And for those of you who may read it in the future, at least you'll have some point of reference now for many of the things they've talked about. Really enjoyed the opportunity to share at least these few facts with you today, and I appreciate your attention, and we'll have questions this evening at the speakers panel, so thank you very much.